You should think again. You're on the wrong side of this, and not in a trivial way.
I think it's a little bit of a moral panic. I just don't see some sort of, frenzy of people wanting to become trans.
In this video, we are going to watch Jordan Peterson take on lefty YouTuber Kyle Kulinski on the topic of trans issues. This one is a heated debate, and I've got a lot to say on this and a few receipts myself. So with that, let's get into it.
So I noticed just the other day, you were banned from Twitter. Now, I'm somebody, nobody can argue against my lefty credentials. Everybody knows I'm a man of the left. Having said that, my solution on this issue of social media censorship has always been, look, we need to expand First Amendment protections. And the way you do that is to regulate these big social media companies like they're public utilities. So if you do that, then basically you're saying this is the new public square and people can speak their mind here. Now, that doesn't mean, of course, you can't, dox people or do direct threats of violence or anything that's actually illegal will remain illegal. But outside of that, you can't censor people just based on political opinion. So, I definitely wouldn't have banned you, suspended you, etc. But I do have a question about that specific tweet that did get you in trouble because, you said something to the effect of,
well, I don't know if it got me in trouble. I don't think I'm in trouble. Twitter banned me, but I don't consider that trouble.
That's fair enough. Fair point. But you said something to the effect of, remember when pride was a sin and the criminal physicians...
And Ellen Page just had her breasts cut off by a criminal physician.
Criminal physician, exactly. So my question is the physician really criminal? If you agree that adults can decide to transition, then why would the physician be criminal? Don't adults have that right if they want to transition?
Not everything legal isn't criminal. And do they have that right? See, I would have left Ellen Page alone if she hadn't been parading her new abs in a fashion magazine. How many kids do you think she can convince to convert? One?
Yeah.
1,000? No, not
See,
yeah.
No,
really?
I want to respond to that. I think that with the trans community, it's very similar to the gay community, where back when that first became a big issue, people thought, oh, if we talk about it, if it's in magazines or whatever, we're promoting kids to go down that path. But really what happened is people are who they are. And if they're gay, they just decided to be like, yeah, I'm gay. And they were just more open and honest with themselves. So I don't think you're promoting people to do that.
No, that's
you're just
not
saying,
what happened.
If you are that, it's okay.
Wrong.
Okay, well,
you're utterly wrong.
I'm listening.
There's nothing about that that's right.
So explain.
Well, there's been an absolute look. One of the reasons that I opposed Bill C-16 in Canada to begin with, this pronoun compelled speech bill, was because I knew perfectly well what was going to happen when we introduced confusion about gender identity into the public sphere. Now, the argument was that if we left people with gender dysphoria alone to make their own way and stop torturing them, that we would decrease the mental health load on those individuals. And my analysis as a clinician was that for every one person of that sort that we hypothetically saved, we doom 1,000 more as a consequence of confusion and social contagion. I knew the literature on psychogenic epidemics. They used to call that mass hysteria, and it's a literature that goes back about 300 years. And often when you introduce social confusion, you can produce a psychogenic epidemic, especially among, generally it's adolescent females who are most susceptible to it. So I thought, oh, well, what's going to happen is we'll produce a psychogenic epidemic of gender dysphoria among adolescent females. And that is exactly what's happened. And it isn't the fact that we've freed up people who are, in doubt about their identity to be who they are. That may have happened in a tiny minority of cases. It's absolutely and definitely the case that we've doomed thousands of kids to brutal, mutilating surgery and premature sterility. And we've done that on the altar of our hypothetical moral virtue and compassion. Look, I read a corporate analysis of the trans surgery industry last week. Growth rate projection for you lefty types and your anti-corporatism. Growth rate projection, 15% per year. Invest now. A $350 million business as of 2022. projected to expand to 750 million by 2027. No moral hazard there? There's plenty of moral hazard there. And that surgery is absolutely brutal.
Boom. Preach it, Dr. Peterson. And isn't it interesting to hear him discuss this from the psychological perspective, considering that he is an actual expert in behavioral psychology, which some people tend to forget sometimes. So let's get to know what he's talking about here a little bit more. He discusses here the idea of mass hysteria, which is known medically as mass psychogenic illness. And it's when large groups of people start to just act irrationally for no discernible reason. Like, an example may be if people were to start wearing 8 masks, or disowning all of their family and friends for not getting an injection, or hoarding toilet paper, or wearing hazmat suits to a supermarket, just as one example. Or another example is when a bunch of nuns in the Middle Ages randomly started meowing for hours a day. That actually happened. But present and historical examples of mass hysteria suggest that it occurs during times of high stress and anxiety. And like he said, particularly in adolescent girls. And besides the meowing nuns, there are actually a lot of cases throughout history of mass hysteria happening to large amounts of young girls, such as the Salem witch trials and many more. And it's pretty weird and creepy when you think about it. Like, why are females so much more susceptible to this? Who knows? Maybe there's somebody I can get on the podcast to explain. And on to the next part now, where Jordan just keeps hitting the nail on the head.
So what percentage of the population do you think, in your conception of how this is unfolding, what percentage of the population do you think is going to end up being trans at the end of this? Do you think like one day it's going to be like 70% of the country is trans?
Well, we know already that about 1 in 5 adolescents now identifies, to use that hated word, identifies as part of the hypothetical LGBTQ plus community. So it's 1 in 5. I don't know what the upper limit is. There's a consulting group in the UK now that's claiming there's 150 different genders. There's actually, I suppose, 7 billion different genders, if you want to get technical about it, because everybody's temperament differs. But I don't know what the upper limit is. And I have no idea what the upper limit is for this surgical intervention. We'll see. But I don't find it, I don't find it the least bit acceptable. And if you think that your compassion is demanding that you extend your pity to the LGBTQ plus community at the cost of sterilizing children, you should think again. You're on the wrong side of this, and not in a trivial way.
I would appreciate if you don't ascribe beliefs to me that I don't have. Remember, my original question was
well,
about...
you said earlier in this question that,
I said
that
Elliot Page is an adult, and so do you think that he has the right to transition?
But
that was the original question.
You made some comments after that. Yeah, but as a star and a public figure...
Guys, if you're enjoying this video, if you get value from it, and if you can appreciate the fact that I don't shy away from these hot topics, then chuck a like on the video, and also subscribe to the channel, because you know that we would love to have you here at the Rattlesnake TV community. Back to the clips.
And a model for emulation. She also has the responsibility not to entice confused adolescents into a catastrophic decision before they have the maturity to make that decision.
I just have to say, Jordan, I think it's a little bit of a moral panic. I just don't see some sort of, frenzy of people wanting to become trans.
First of all, that's a hell of a way to put it.
Why
don't you take a look at the increase in surgical interventions and see what you think? I mean, how many do you think is too many?
Again,
if we're talking about
I'll answer your question. The argument is it used to be very repressed because that's very outside of the tradition and the norm and the standard, and that now we sort of let the boot off the neck a little bit.
What used to be suppressed?
The entire LGBTQ community. I mean, it was very recently we even got gay marriage in the United States.
First of all, they're not a community.
Well, you understand the point I'm making.
No, actually, neither I understand it nor you, and that's why we're delving into it. First of all, they're not a community. That's just a catchphrase. It's a buzzword. And I'll tell you something else, that almost all the kids who are undergoing surgical intervention, the clinical literature is absolutely clear on this. 80% of kids with gender dysphoria identify as homosexual when they mature. 80%. And that means the vast majority of people who are being converted surgically are gay. Now, how is that an advantage to the gay community precisely?
Okay, so there's a lot going on here and a fair bit to unpack. Okay, so Kyle's argument here is essentially that these people are now just becoming who they've always been, that they've broken the shackles, the chains have been broken, and now they are allowed to be who they are in this hyper-liberalized world. It's just a great trans awakening, and there's nothing sinister going on whatsoever. Not his greatest take, and I'm actually a big fan of Kyle Kulinski. I've been a subscriber for years, and he's pretty much my go-to for lefty news and lefty perspectives, which is important to get. But Jordan is spot on here, and the numbers speak for themselves, in the sense that the number of people being referred for gender identity development services has clearly, as you can see by these charts, gone through the roof over the last 10 years. And this is only up till 2016 and then 2019. And you can imagine it is only going north. And also, as you can see, Jordan Peterson was completely right. It is mostly girls who are susceptible to this. According to the transgender trend, in the late 60s, 90% of transsexual adults were male. 50 years on, and the latest published figures from the Tavistock Clinic indicate that child referrals are almost 70% female. In the year 2011-2012, the overall referral rate of girls overtook boys for the first time. The latest referral figures saw the number of girls increase to more than double the number of boys, and girls overtook boys in under 12 age groups for the first time, 51.1%. But this is in the 12 to 14 and 15 to 17.9 age groups that we see the biggest jump in referrals of girls. 74.4% and 71.4% respectively. Teenage referrals are over 70% girls. What we don't know is the referral rate of girls over 17 years and 9 months who go straight to adult services but are still teenagers. And as you can see here, according to the Tavistock Clinic, who have thankfully been shut down, according to the good work of some activists, since this show that 69% are girls, 31% boys. So there is something extremely concerning going on here, and I'll let you guys be the judge of that. And I think that we're going to see some pretty damning statistics coming out over the next few decades about this one.
No, see, I'm not taking a position in any way, shape, or form on the kids, because I don't know the first thing about this to comment on the kids. Well, but see, that's why we're having this conversation, though, is because my original question was about the adults and what your take is on the adults. And it sounds to me like, let me ask you guys, would you ban transition surgery for adults?
I don't know.
Really?
Yeah, really. We're paying a big price for it. And I think that it was an act of stunning hubris to conduct the first trans surgery procedure. And it's not obvious to me at all that it's been a net social good.
But aren't there some people that are obviously trans who were born in one body, they feel like they're in the other body, and when they're an adult, they can make the decision? And then even from just a freedom and liberty perspective, shouldn't they have that right? Even if they do it and then they regret it, shouldn't they have the right to try it?
It's a good question. I mean, it's a tricky one, right? Because there's all sorts of surgical enhancement procedures that are it's not obviously appropriate to make them illegal. And I don't know exactly where the cutoff line is, so to speak. And that's partly why we're having a public discussion about it. But this entire argument, in many ways, is stated so idiotically that it almost defies description. I mean, what do you mean feel like you're in the wrong body? Well, what kind of measurement is that? No, hang on a sec. There are rules for these sorts of diagnostic decisions. Okay. The rule is that you have to make a valid and reliable diagnosis. That's if you're diagnosing depression or anxiety or obsessive compulsive disorder or cancer or anything like that. There are standards that you have to abide by in order to make a diagnosis, in order to fulfill the obligations of your professional college. If someone comes to you and says, I feel like I have lung cancer, that is not sufficient grounds upon which to formulate a diagnosis, much less proceed to surgery. And so the question is, what do you mean by feel? What is that? Is that an emotion? Is it a motivation? Is it a philosophical conclusion? What is it?
let me explain.
feeling.
Let me explain to you what I mean. So I've been doing my show for about a decade, and about 2 or 3 years into doing my show, there were, some stories here and there that I covered about the trans issue. Somebody who is trans reached out to me and explained to me in a very straightforward way, yeah, look, I was born biologically female. I feel like I'm biologically male. My reality
What does that
never lined
mean?
up. Well, I'm just explaining what they said, and then you can respond however you'd like to respond. And they told me as soon as I got the surgery, changed the way I dressed, changed the way I appeared, I felt phenomenally better. And so that's why, at least for me, this was the answer. Now, I think it would be incredibly arrogant for me to say back to that person, no, you shouldn't do that, or I know better than you do for yourself. Now, that's not to say that every time somebody does this, it works out well, of course, because everybody's an individual. But in some instances, that's the answer. So, me as a simple outsider, I just look at it and say, hey, whatever floats your boat, and if it works, it works.
Look, most of the time, my attitude is you can go to hell in handbasket any way you choose if you're an adult. Now, this problem is complicated and compounded by the fact of the necessity of medical involvement and the ethics on the medical front. So when you asked me about how that should be regulated, my answer was I'm not exactly sure about that.
Yeah,
although it isn't obvious to me it's obvious to me that the trans surgery enterprise has gone way too far, thousands of people too far. And I'm certain that it's harmed exponentially more people than it's helped.
So it's a good objection there by Kyle, and it's something that I too get hung up on. I tend to think that adults should be able to largely do what they want with their bodies, as long as they're not hurting anybody else. I don't particularly care if you want to be Arthur or Martha, but what should be the parameters, the medical guidelines, etc., for somebody to be able to do such a thing to their body? What if it's actually something else that they're suffering from? And that if the doctors hadn't have been so zealous and hadn't have just been in a rush to just affirm them, then they could have reached them, gotten to the root of the problem, and maybe the person would have lived a much better life. So when Kyle says, well, isn't it just obvious that some people are just trans because they feel a certain way? Well, no, actually, because that doesn't really mean anything. You can't actually even measure it. So does it even exist? If you're a woman without a penis, without testicles, without male hormones, and all of the other many, many biological factors that makes up a man, then what do you mean by you feel like a man? How do you know what it feels like to be a man? You literally can't know. And also, if this is some sort of a social contagion, then how far do you want it to go? How widespread do you want it to become? What are the broader implications of this? What effect does it have on the family? What effect does it have on the birth rates? And also, what effect does it have on the truth? So, guys, food for thought there. Looking forward to reading your thoughts. And if you guys want to watch another video, of course, click right here. Until next time, I'm Jake. This is Rattlesnake TV, keeping you armed and dangerous.